Bloomberg. I'm John Ehrlichman. If you needed more evidence of the ongoing tensions between China and the U.S., we have more headlines this morning. The U.S. government warning China it will suspend passenger airline flights from that nation if Beijing does not allow American carriers to re-enter that market. And oftentimes, Canada finds itself in the middle of these tensions between the U.S. and China. We speak so frequently about the developing situation with Huawei. We wanted to get some more perspectives on all of this. Max Baucus served as the U.S. ambassador to China between 2014 and 2017. Prior to that, he was the longest-serving senator in Montana's history and also the former chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. Ambassador, thanks very much for being with us. And I do want to talk about the story of the U.S. and China, but obviously in your country over the last few days, there has been so much commentary and observation of the social unrest in cities across the country. I did want to just start by getting your general observations on what's been going on.
Well, we're breaking up a little bit, but I think I got a sense of your question. If it's about the unrest in the United States, it's really abominable. It's very ominous. It's tearing our country apart. I must say it's also giving China a lot of fodder. Chinese media is pointing out the unrest in the United States and explaining to Chinese people that that America is not a very good country. They can't get their act together. Where we, China, we're getting our act together. Of course, China doesn't admit some of the problems that exist in China, but the unrest is causing a huge problem.
So that's interesting. If you're pointing to China and the reaction in China to the protest activity, I am curious with these escalating tensions between the two nations, how you see things unfolding from this point.
I think it's going to get even more tense, and the chasm between the two countries is going to widen even more during these next several months before the U.S. election. A lot of the rhetoric coming out of Washington, D.C. is political. It's to get the president, he wants to be reelected, to get the president and other members of Congress reelected. And I think Beijing sees that. I think Beijing knows a lot of the rhetoric from Washington is political. The real question is what happens after the election. And I hope very much that both countries, let's say China with the National Security Act, tones it down. They're not nearly as draconian in actions that they might otherwise take. Same with the U.S. The U.S. does not react with all the draconian measures that it's talking about with respect to action that China is taking in Hong Kong. Now, if they both back off a little bit, that is the United States and China, that's going to help a lot. So, and also it helped very much if each country really realizes, and I know they do, that in the long run, we got to work together, got to get together. China's not going anywhere. It's always going to be here. Second largest economy in the world. The U.S. isn't going anywhere, so we have to figure out ways to get together better.
Ambassador, I'd love to get your perspective on how Canada fits into this story. Obviously, you saw the headlines tied to Meng Wanzhou last week. And even this week, we've seen some of the big telecom companies in this country, Bell Canada and TELUS, continuing to roll out their plans for 5G service. Absent from those announcements, though, is Huawei as a partner, and we're still not sure where the Canadian government will fall or decide on working with a company like Huawei. What's been your observation on how Canada fits into this story?
Well, Canada's in a really tough spot because when Canada decided to honor the U.S. request to stop Meng Wanzhou and detain her pending extradition in the United States, that also obviously caused China to react adversely. And of course, China detained a couple of Canadian citizens. That standoff, I think, is going to continue for quite a while. I hope, frankly, there's a way to work this out so that Meng is not tried in the U.S. courts. If she is tried in the U.S. courts, that's going to cause an even greater rift between the U.S. and China. There's got to be some way to work this out, punish Huawei some other way. But I frankly think that if she is extradited to the U.S., it's going to cause a serious rift, a greater rift between the U.S. and China, and it's also going to cause a rift between Canada and China.
So then if you don't want to see that situation, is that the kind of thing that's going to require some coordination, for example, between Canada and the U.S. in the weeks ahead?
I'm sorry you're breaking up. I didn't understand the question. I think you asked if there was some other action that could satisfy Canada and satisfy the United States other than trying in the United States. And we have to, if that was part of your question, yes, actions like that have to be found to find some kind of resolution.
I wonder, when it comes to the dialogue between Canada and the U.S., what you anticipate to happen and what you think ultimately should happen, given your comments.
Well, I'm sorry, you're really breaking up a lot. I would just basically, here's what the United States and Canada should do. They should sit back and say, okay, let's work together, the United States and Canada, with respect to China. Let's develop a long-term strategic plan, decide what we can agree with respect to China, what we cannot agree with. And those actions where we cannot agree with, we very definitely, firmly tell China that privately, say, China, you can't go there. And if you do, there'll be very significant repercussions, and make it clear that the repercussions are real. We have to earn China's respect. So China respects the United States and China respects Canada. And it will only happen when we sit down and act like, solid citizens and grown-ups and are very firm, quietly, privately, in our resolve with respect to China. Then China will respect us.
Just before we let you go, Ambassador, the story of the economy getting back to some kind of normal has created optimism in the stock market. I wonder if these issues with China remain resolved and we get towards the election. How do you think it might ultimately impact what happens in November?
Well, essentially, it's my sense that Americans are really concerned about their stature of the world. That is, China's rising. That causes significant angst, anxiety in the United States. Clearly, today, Americans are very worried about COVID-19, and how is that going to get resolved? I think Americans more and more are looking more toward resolution. They're looking toward more confidence in their lives in the future. And that means looking more toward more solid leadership in the White House and in Congress. It's a very uncertain time, but I think that there's an opportunity for people to emerge in the U.S. political system who show leadership, who show compassion, who show stature, or have gravitas. And if they do show that, they're going to get elected.
Ambassador Baucus, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you navigating my questions over video conference. Not always the easiest thing to do these days, but that's how we do it these days. Thanks very much. Max Baucus, the former U.S. ambassador to China between 2014 and 2017, and of course, prior to that, a senator, Democratic senator from